History is written by the victors. We've all heard it. The big stories of our past are shaped by the winners, focusing on the epic battles we learn about in school. We know Normandy, we know Waterloo, we know Gettysburg. These were the clashes that forged nations and defined entire eras. But what happens when a battle that sealed an empire's fate is just forgotten? How can a brutal, month-long fight that redrew the map and cost tens of thousands of lives get pushed aside like a footnote? Well, history is full of these ghosts. Pivotal, bloody, world-altering conflicts that have been totally overshadowed, lost in the fog of a bigger war, or even deliberately buried, because the story they tell is just too complicated, too inconvenient, or too humiliating. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the forgotten fronts, the overlooked campaigns that quietly twisted the course of history, and whose echoes still shape the world we live in. The battle that doomed Pearl Harbor, Khalkhin Gol, 1939. Our first story takes us to the desolate, wind-swept plains on the border of Mongolia and Manchuria in the summer of 1939. In Europe, the continent is a powder keg, just weeks away from the German invasion of Poland. But out here in East Asia, a very different war is already raging, a war that will have huge consequences for the global conflict about to explode. Here, two expanding empires were on a collision course: the Soviet Union under Joseph Stalin and Imperial Japan. For years, tensions had been simmering along their poorly defined border. The Japanese Kwantung Army, an aggressive and powerful force occupying Manchuria, saw the Soviets as their main rival. They were pushing a strategy known as Hokushinran, the Strike North doctrine. The goal? Seize Siberia's vast natural resources, cripple the Soviets, and lock in Japan's destiny as the top power in Asia. In May of 1939, a small skirmish over grazing rights along a river called Hürtgen Gol boiled over. It was the spark the Kwantung Army was looking for. They moved in force, absolutely confident that their superior fighting spirit, their Bushido code, would crush the supposedly weak Soviet soldiers, whose officer corps had just been gutted by Stalin's purges. At first, it looked like they were right. The Japanese infantry were tenacious, deadly fighters. They pushed back the Soviet and Mongolian troops and inflicted heavy casualties. But they had made a fatal mistake. They underestimated both the industrial might of the Soviet Union and the mind of the man sent to take over, a then unknown general named Georgy Zhukov. Zhukov was a master of logistics and a believer in a new, terrifying kind of warfare. While the Japanese still put the infantrymen at the center of their army, Zhukov believed in massed, coordinated power. He began a massive, secret buildup. Under the cover of darkness, he moved thousands of trucks, hundreds of tanks, armored cars, and aircraft to the front. He built a vast supply chain, a logistical miracle that the Japanese, with their focus on warrior spirit over supplies, couldn't even imagine. On August 20th, 1939, Zhukov unleashed hell. What came next wasn't a battle, it was an annihilation. It was one of the first true examples of Blitzkrieg, the lightning war that would soon terrorize Europe. Soviet artillery rained down, followed by waves of bombers. Then Zhukov's tanks punched through the Japanese flanks, not just to support infantry, but as a giant armored fist. They pulled off a classic double envelopment, a huge pincer movement that surrounded the entire Japanese 6th Army. The Japanese soldiers fought with incredible bravery, but bravery is no match for armor and steel. Trapped and facing overwhelming firepower, they were systematically crushed. By the time a ceasefire was signed on September 15th, the Japanese had suffered a catastrophic defeat. The Kwantung Army was humiliated, its best divisions shattered. The shock in Tokyo was profound. The Strike North dream was dead, broken on the plains of Mongolia. The lesson Japan's high command learned was clear-cut. Do not, under any circumstances, start a major land war with the Soviet Union. And so they turned their eyes south. The Nanshinran, or Strike South doctrine, long pushed by the Imperial Japanese Navy, was now the only option. If they couldn't take Siberia's resources, they would take the oil and rubber of Southeast Asia. And standing in the way of that prize was the United States Pacific Fleet, stationed at a place called Pearl Harbor. So why is this battle almost unknown in the West? Because just 2 days after Zhukov launched his attack, Germany and the Soviet Union signed their infamous non-aggression pact. 12 days after that, Germany invaded Poland, and the world's attention snapped to Europe. A battle that directly led to Japan's decision to attack the United States was instantly buried by the opening shots of World War II. The story of Khalkhin Gol is a powerful reminder that history is a complex web where a single overlooked event can change everything. The stories of the soldiers who fought on these forgotten fronts deserve to be told. If the Green Hell, the Battle of Hürtgen Forest, 1944. From a forgotten clash of empires in the East, we go to a forgotten meat grinder in the West. By the fall of 1944, the Allies were closing in on Germany. After breaking out from Normandy, spirits were high. Everyone thought the war might be over by Christmas. But standing between the Allied armies and the heart of Germany was a dark and forbidding obstacle: the Hürtgen Forest. This was a dense, sprawling forest of tightly packed fir trees, steep ridges, and deep ravines, the heart of Germany's formidable Siegfried Line defenses. American High Command saw it as a problem. The forest could be used to hide German troops for a counterattack, and it blocked the most direct route to a series of crucial dams on the Rohr River. If the Germans blew those dams, they could flood the valley below, bogging down the Allied advance for months. The decision was made. The forest had to be taken. What followed was a campaign that even hardened veterans would later call a green hell. The American commanders made a catastrophic error. The terrain of the Hürtgen completely neutralized every Allied advantage. The thick canopy of trees and relentless bad weather made their air superiority useless. The dense woods and lack of roads meant their tanks were trapped on narrow, easily ambushed trails. This was going to be a battle fought by infantry, yard by bloody yard. For nearly 6 months, from September 1944 to February 1945, the U.S. Army threw division after division into that forest. They weren't just fighting the Germans, they were fighting the forest itself. German artillery shells, instead of burying themselves in the dirt, would hit the treetops, creating tree bursts that rained wood splinters and shrapnel down on the men below. The fighting was so close quarters that soldiers often couldn't see the enemy until they were just feet away. The Germans, commanded by the brilliant defensive strategist Field Marshal Model, used the terrain perfectly. They were dug into a network of concrete pillboxes, bunkers, and minefields, all pre-sighted for their artillery. Frankly, they were amazed that the Americans kept bashing their heads against this natural fortress instead of just going around it. For the American GI, it was a living nightmare. Rain and snow were constant, foxholes filled with icy water. Trench foot and pneumonia became as deadly as German machine guns. Entire companies were chewed up just to gain a few hundred yards of useless woods. One regiment suffered 2,800 casualties to advance just over 300 yards a day. That's one soldier falling for every 2 yards gained. The battle became a test of pure, brutal attrition. In the end, the Americans took the forest and the dams, but at a horrific cost. The U.S. First Army suffered at least 33,000 casualties, making it the longest single battle in U.S. Army history and one of its bloodiest. So why is this brutal struggle so often forgotten? Because just as the fighting in the Hürtgen was winding down, the Germans launched their last great gamble of the war, the Battle of the Bulge. The sheer drama and high stakes of the Bulge completely overshadowed the grim, grinding horror of the Hürtgen. The battle for the forest had no glorious breakthroughs or famous last stands. It was just mud, blood, and a victory whose strategic value is still debated by historians today.